The morning his daughter told him to leave, Elias Ashford didn't argue. He stood in the doorway of the house he had helped build decades ago, holding a single duffel bag, while she avoided his eyes and her husband watched from the hallway like it was already over. By noon he was driving toward a cabin no one in the family knew still existed. What he had hidden inside those walls wasn't money. It was 15 years of proof that someone had lied and that he had never stopped waiting for the one person who never came. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Years earlier, the truth had already begun to fracture inside that family. Elias didn't slam the door when he left. He pulled it closed carefully, the same way he always had, making sure the latch caught so it wouldn't rattle in the wind. Old habits didn't disappear just because a man was no longer welcome. The morning air was cold. It settled into his joints as he walked down the driveway, each step slower than the last. The gravel crunched beneath his boots, a sound he had heard thousands of times, but never like this, not as a stranger. Behind him, the front door stayed shut. He paused at the end of the driveway and turned back once, just once. The house looked the same. The porch still leaned slightly to the left where the foundation had settled years ago. The railing still needed sanding. He had meant to fix that. Denise had told him to go without raising her voice. That was the part that stayed with him. She had stood in the kitchen, one hand resting on the counter, her eyes fixed somewhere just past him. Not at him. Never at him. Her face had been calm, almost too calm, like she had rehearsed the moment until it no longer felt real. It's time, she had said. Not I'm sorry, not we'll figure something out. Just that. Marcus had filled the silence that followed. We can't keep doing this, he said, arms crossed tight across his chest. The bills are stacking up. Property taxes, repairs, groceries, it's not sustainable. His voice had that edge to it, not anger exactly. Something sharper, fear, maybe. The kind of fear that made a man start counting everything, every dollar, every inconvenience, every person who didn't fit neatly into the budget. Elias had looked at him for a long moment. I paid off this house, Elias said quietly, long before you came along. Marcus shifted, just slightly. It wasn't denial, it was irritation. That was then, he replied. Things change. Denise didn't interrupt. She didn't defend either of them. She just stood there, folding and refolding a dish towel that didn't need folding. Elias had seen that before, the way she disappeared into small movements when she didn't want to feel something. He had waited. Just a few seconds, long enough for her to look up, to say something that would make it stop. She didn't, so he nodded once, turned and went upstairs. It hadn't taken long to pack. A few shirts, a pair of jeans, his old work jacket. The photograph he kept tucked in the back of a drawer, the only one he hadn't thrown away over the years. He slipped it into the side pocket of the duffel bag without looking at it. Downstairs nothing had changed. The same silence, the same careful avoidance. When he reached the front door, Marcus stepped aside without a word. Denise stayed in the kitchen. Elias waited again. She didn't follow him. Now, standing beside his truck, he let out a slow breath and opened the door. The seat creaked as he lowered himself in, the familiar weight of the steering wheel settling into his hands. For a moment, he didn't start the engine. He just sat there staring at the house. Then he turned the key. The engine coughed, caught, and steadied. He pulled away without looking back again. The road stretched out ahead of him, long and quiet, lined with trees that had already begun to lose their leaves. He drove without music, without urgency, the way a man drives when he doesn't have anywhere he needs to be, only somewhere he has decided to go. The cabin hadn't crossed his mind in years, not because he forgot, because remembering hurt too much, but now, with nowhere else left, it was the only place that made sense. No one else knew about it, not Denise, not Marcus, no one. He had made sure of that miles past, then more. The town disappeared behind him, replaced by open land, then forest, then the narrow dirt road that cut through the trees like a path someone had carved out by hand. He slowed as the tires shifted from pavement to gravel, then from gravel to packed dirt. The trees closed in around him, tall and quiet, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the sky. It looked the same, exactly the same. Elias pulled the truck to a stop at the end of the road. The cabin stood there, small and still, just as he had left it. The porch sagged slightly on one side. The wood had weathered, but the structure held strong. It always had. He stepped out of the truck, the air colder here, sharper. For a long moment he didn't move. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a key, old, brass, worn smooth from years of use. He walked up the steps slowly, each one creaking under his weight. When he reached the door, his hand hovered over the lock. 15 years. 15 years of building, hiding, waiting. His fingers tightened around the key, and for the first time since he left the house that morning, something in his chest shifted. Not anger, not regret, something heavier. He slid the key into the lock, paused, and then turned it. The lock clicked with a dull, heavy sound that seemed louder than it should have been. Elias pushed the door open slowly. The hinges didn't creak. He had oiled them himself years ago, and somehow they still held that quiet promise. The air inside was stale but not abandoned. It smelled like cedar, dust, and something faintly familiar, like time itself had settled into the walls and refused to leave. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. For a moment he just stood there. The cabin was exactly as he remembered it. The same small living space, the same stone fireplace, the same narrow kitchen with the window over the sink. Every board, every joint, every edge had been shaped by his hands. It wasn't large, it wasn't fancy, but it was precise, solid, built to last, built for a reason. He set his duffel bag down near the wall and walked slowly across the room, running his fingers along the surface of a wooden shelf. No dust thick enough to suggest neglect. No signs of damage. Someone had been here. That made him pause. Not long, just enough for the thought to settle and then slip away. He moved toward the fireplace. The stonework was still tight, the edges clean. He crouched slightly, brushing his hand over the base, remembering how long it had taken him to fit each piece just right. 15 years. Not all at once, not every day, but enough days, enough nights, enough quiet hours spent measuring, cutting, fitting, and when no one was watching, hiding. He straightened and let out a slow breath. "You're still standing," he murmured, almost to himself. The silence answered back. He walked into the kitchen next. The faucet handle turned stiffly at first, then loosened. Brown water sputtered out, then cleared. Functional, just like he had left it. Everything here had a purpose, even the things no one could see. His gaze drifted along the baseboards, then the cabinets, then the seams between panels. To anyone else, it would have looked like nothing. Just wood, just construction. But he knew better. He stepped back into the living room and lowered himself into the single wooden chair by the fireplace. It creaked slightly under his weight, but held firm. For the first time since leaving the house, his shoulders dropped. Not in relief, in recognition. This place wasn't just a cabin. It was the only place where things had made sense. He reached into the side pocket of his duffel bag and pulled out the photograph he had taken with him. He didn't look at it right away. He just held it between his fingers, the edges worn soft from years of being handled, then hidden, then taken out again. Finally, he glanced down. The image was simple. 2 adults standing side by side. One of them him, younger, stronger. The other he looked away before his mind could finish the memory. He set the photograph on the small table beside the chair, face down. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, low and steady, the kind of sound that filled the gaps between thoughts. Elias leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "They told you I was gone," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't say the name, he didn't have to. "They told you I stopped trying." His jaw tightened. "I didn't." The words hung there, heavier than anything else in the room. For a long moment he didn't move. Then something shifted in his expression. Not anger, not sadness, decision. He pushed himself up from the chair and walked back to the wall beside the fireplace. To anyone else it looked like a normal stretch of wood. Clean lines, smooth finish, no gaps. But he knew exactly where to press. His hand hovered for a second. 15 years. He had built this place piece by piece, layer by layer, every hidden track, every sliding panel, every compartment sealed away from a world that had decided he didn't belong in it. If he opened it now, there was no going back. Not that there was anything left to go back to. He pressed his palm flat against the baseboard and pushed. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a soft, almost silent shift, the wood slid sideways. A narrow compartment revealed itself behind it. Elias stared at it without reaching in. He already knew what was inside, but knowing and seeing were not the same. Slowly he crouched down. Inside the compartment were envelopes, neat, aligned, untouched. Each one labeled in the same careful handwriting he had practiced over and over again until his hands stopped shaking. Years, names, dates, proof. He reached in and picked up the first envelope. His fingers trembled, just slightly, not from age, from everything that came with it. He turned it over. The seal was still intact. He swallowed. "I kept them," he said under his breath. "Every single one." His thumb slid under the edge of the paper, hesitating for half a second. Then he stopped. Something was wrong. Elias frowned. He looked closer. The envelope felt different. Not the weight, the surface. He ran his finger across it again. There was a faint indentation on the back, not part of the paper, not part of his handwriting. A mark. He pulled the envelope closer to the light. There it was, a small, barely visible stamp. Returned, his breath caught. Slowly he reached back into the compartment and pulled out another envelope. Then another, each one the same, each one marked returned. His hand tightened around the stack. "No," he whispered, "that wasn't possible. He had sent them every year." He remembered standing at the post office, remembered handing them over, remembered watching them disappear behind the counter, trusting that they would reach where they were meant to go. He had never gotten a single one back. Not once. Elias's mind raced, trying to piece together something that made sense. Someone had taken them. Someone had seen them. Someone had decided they would never be delivered. His chest tightened. He sat back on his heels, the envelope still in his hand, his gaze fixed on the hidden compartment as if it might explain itself. It didn't. The silence pressed in around him. Then his eyes shifted. To the very back of the compartment, something else was there. Not an envelope. A thin, flat object partially hidden beneath the stack. Elias reached in slowly and pulled it out. It was a photograph. The edges were rough, torn. He turned it over. And the moment he saw it, his entire body went still. The image had been ripped clean down the middle. One half missing. The half that remained showed him, standing exactly where he was now, smiling, and someone else, someone who had been standing beside him, was gone, not faded, not lost, deliberately removed. Elias stared at the empty space where that person should have been. Then he looked back at the envelopes in his hand, at the stamped word repeated over and over again, returned, and for the first time the truth began to form in his mind. Not that he had been forgotten, but that someone had made sure he would be. He tightened his grip on the photograph, and then he heard it. A sound. Outside, gravel shifting under tires. Elias's head snapped toward the door. Someone was coming up the road. And whoever it was, knew exactly where to find him. Elias didn't move right away. The sound of tires grinding slowly over gravel echoed through the trees. Closer now, deliberate, unhurried. Whoever was coming wasn't lost. They weren't turning around. They were heading straight for the cabin. He set the torn photograph down on the table, face up this time, as if hiding it no longer made sense. The envelopes stayed in his hand, his grip tightening just enough to crease the edges. For a brief moment, something old and instinctive told him to close the compartment, to slide the baseboard back into place and pretend none of this had been uncovered yet. But that instinct didn't belong to the man he had become. Not anymore. Elias stepped away from the wall and moved toward the window beside the door. He kept his movements slow, quiet. His shoulders were tense, but his face had settled into something steadier, not calm, controlled. The vehicle came into view through the trees, an old pickup, faded paint, rust along the edges. It rolled forward until it reached the clearing in front of the cabin and came to a stop beside his truck. The engine cut. Silence rushed back in, then the driver's door opened. A woman stepped out. Elias frowned slightly, searching his memory before the recognition clicked into place. May Perkins. She hadn't changed much. Her hair was more gray now, pulled back the same way she always wore it. Her posture still straight, steady. The kind of presence that didn't demand attention but held it anyway. She looked at the cabin first, then at his truck, then finally at the door. Elias stepped back from the window before she could see him standing there. He exhaled slowly. Of all the people who could have shown up, this made the most sense, and somehow that didn't make it easier. A moment later he heard footsteps on the porch. Solid, familiar, no hesitation. Then a knock, not loud, just certain. Elias stood there looking at the door, his mind still racing through the pieces that had just shifted in his world. The letters, the stamps, the photograph torn in half. Someone had known. Someone had been close enough to intercept everything he had sent. The knock came again. Elias, May called through the door. "I know you're in there." He closed his eyes for a second, then walked forward and opened the door. They stood facing each other in the doorway. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. May's eyes moved over him slowly, taking in the details, the bag, the lines in his face, the quiet weight he carried now. "You look older," she said finally. Elias gave a faint, tired nod. "That tends to happen." Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "I saw your truck," she said. "Figured it was you." He stepped aside without saying anything. She walked in. May paused just inside the doorway, her gaze moving through the cabin with a kind of quiet familiarity. She didn't look surprised by the condition of it. If anything, there was a small, almost imperceptible shift in her shoulders, like something she had been holding finally eased. "You kept it up," Elias said. She nodded. "Once a week, sometimes more if the weather was bad." She ran her hand lightly along the edge of the table. "Pipes would frozen years ago if someone didn't check on it." Elias studied her. "You promised," he said. May didn't look at him right away. "I did." Silence settled between them again, but it wasn't empty. It carried years in it, unspoken things, missed chances, questions that had never found answers. Then Elias stepped toward the table and picked up the stack of envelopes. He held them out. "Explain this." May's eyes dropped to the envelopes, just for a second. Then she took a step closer. Her expression didn't change. Not at first, but something behind her eyes did. She reached out and took one of the envelopes from his hand, turning it over slowly. Her thumb brushed across the stamped word like she already knew it would be there, returned. She let out a quiet breath. "So you found them. That's not an answer." Elias's voice wasn't loud, but it had weight now. A sharp edge that hadn't been there before I sent these, he said. "Every year. I stood in line, I paid for the postage. I watched them go out." He shook his head once, slow and deliberate. "They never came back." May looked at him then, really looked. "No," she said quietly, "they wouldn't have." "Then how did they end up here?" His hand tightened, with stamps on them, with marks I never saw. May hesitated, not long but long enough, and that was all Elias needed to see. "You knew," he said. It wasn't a question. May looked down at the envelope in her hand, then set it carefully on the table. "I knew something wasn't right," she said. "That's not the same thing." "No," she admitted, "it's not." Elias took a step closer, the space between them shrinking. "Who intercepted them?" he asked. "Who was close enough to get their hands on every single one of these without me ever knowing?" May didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted past him toward the wall where the compartment still stood open, the hidden space exposed, the truth no longer sealed away. Then she looked back at him. "You're not going to like the answer," she said. Elias let out a humorless breath. "I don't think there's anything left I'm going to like." Another pause, longer this time, the kind that stretched just enough to make the air feel heavier. May's voice dropped slightly when she spoke again. "They didn't get intercepted at the post office." Elias's chest tightened. "They never made it that far." His eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" May held his gaze, steady now. "It means," she said slowly, "someone had access before they were ever mailed." The words landed hard. Elias's mind moved quickly, retracing years, routines, habits, every step he had taken, every place he had gone. The post office, the mailbox, the house, his house. "No," he said under his breath. But the thought was already there. "Growing." "Who?" he demanded. May didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled something out. A folded piece of paper, old, creased, edges worn. She set it down on the table between them. Elias looked at it, then at her. "What is this?" May didn't soften her voice. "Something I found a few months ago," she said. "After he passed." Elias's gaze sharpened. "Who passed?" May didn't look away. "David Chen called me," she said. "Said there were things in the estate that didn't make sense. Missing records, mismatched dates." She tapped the paper lightly. This was in one of the files. Elias picked it up. Slowly, carefully, he unfolded it, and as his eyes moved across the page, the color drained from his face. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't something he had written. It was a copy of a signed statement, a legal affidavit, and the name at the bottom. He froze. "Marcus Reed." Elias looked up, his voice barely steady. "This says I showed up drunk, that I threatened him." May nodded once. That's what he told the court. Elias's hand tightened around the paper. I was sober, he said. I know, May cut in quietly. I was there that night. The room went still. Elias stared at her. May held his gaze. I saw who actually opened the door. Elias's breath hitched. Then you know, he said. May nodded again. I do, a beat. Then Elias leaned forward, his voice low, controlled, dangerous in a way it hadn't been before. Say it. May didn't hesitate this time. It wasn't Marcus who stopped you from getting to her, she said. Elias's grip on the affidavit tightened. Then who did? May's eyes didn't waver. It was Denise. The name hit harder than anything else. Elias didn't speak, didn't move. For a moment, the entire cabin seemed to shrink around him. Then his eyes dropped back to the paper in his hands. The affidavit, the lie, the signature, and beneath it another line. A notarization with a date. A date that didn't match the one he remembered. Elias's brow furrowed. He looked closer. Then his expression shifted. Confusion, then something darker. This date, he said slowly. It's wrong. May's voice was quiet. I know. Elias looked up, something new forming behind his eyes. Someone altered this. May didn't answer. She didn't need to. Elias stared at the document again, his mind racing, connecting pieces that had never fit before. The letters, the stamps, the lies, the silence, and now this. He set the paper down very carefully. Then he looked toward the open compartment in the wall. If this was changed, he said, his voice low, then what else is in here that isn't what it's supposed to be? May followed his gaze. Neither of them spoke, but they both understood the same thing at the same time. The truth he had uncovered wasn't complete, not even close, and whatever was still hidden inside those walls was worse than anything he had found so far. Elias didn't speak right away. The weight of May's words hung in the room, heavier than anything he had uncovered so far. Denise, not just avoiding him, not just turning away, but actively standing between him and the truth for years. He let out a slow breath and picked up the affidavit again, studying it more carefully this time. The signature at the bottom wasn't the part that bothered him anymore. It was the date, the spacing, the faint difference in ink where it shouldn't have been. Someone hadn't just lied. They had adjusted the record after the fact. That doesn't happen by accident, he said quietly. May nodded. No, it doesn't. Elias set the paper down again and turned toward the wall. The compartment was still open, the envelopes still partially disturbed from where he had pulled them out. For years, he had believed this space held everything he needed to leave behind. Now it felt like the beginning of something else. He stepped closer. If this was altered, he said, then I didn't just lose contact with her. May didn't respond, but he didn't need her to. They made sure I lost it, he finished. His jaw tightened. That realization didn't break him the way it might have once. It didn't collapse inward. It sharpened. Elias crouched down again and reached into the compartment, this time pulling everything out, one piece at a time. He placed the envelopes on the floor beside him, lining them up in order without even thinking about it. Years of habit still guided his hands. But now he wasn't looking at them as memories. He was looking at them as evidence. You said David Chen called you, he said without looking back. About the estate. Yes, what exactly didn't make sense. May hesitated again, but this time it wasn't uncertainty. It was caution. Some of the documents didn't match the original filings, she said. Property records, mostly. A few things about the taxes. Nothing that would stop the transfer outright, but enough to raise questions. Elias frowned. They were trying to take it? I don't think they knew about the cabin, May said. Not fully. But there were inquiries, requests for valuations. Someone was trying to figure out what was left. Elias let that settle. So it wasn't just about cutting him off. It had been about control, money, assets, and silence. He reached deeper into the compartment, his fingers brushing against the back panel. Something shifted. He paused. That wasn't right. The compartment should have ended there. He knew the dimensions. He had built it himself. But there was space behind the back. Elias pressed his fingers along the edge, testing the wood. It didn't give at first. Then finally, with a faint click, a narrow section loosened. May stepped closer. You didn't tell me about this one, she said quietly. I didn't know it was still here, Elias replied. He pulled the panel forward. Behind it was a second, smaller space. Not part of the original design, or at least not part of what he remembered finishing. Inside there was no stack of letters, no neat arrangement, just a single item. A small cassette recorder, old, Compact, the kind people stopped using years ago. Elias stared at it. I didn't put this here, he said. May's expression shifted slightly. Then someone else did. He reached in slowly and lifted it out. The plastic casing was worn, scratched along the edges. There was a strip of tape across the front with handwriting on it. Not his. Not May's. Elias turned it slightly to catch the light. His name was written there, Elias Ashford. Below it, in smaller letters, statement. His pulse picked up. He hadn't made any recording. Not like this. Do you have anything that plays this, he asked. May shook her head. Not anymore. Elias nodded once, already moving. He set the recorder carefully on the table, then grabbed his jacket. We're going into town. May didn't argue. 20 minutes later, they were driving down the narrow road, the cabin shrinking behind them as the trees closed in again. The truck rattled slightly over the uneven ground, the sound filling the silence between them. Elias kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the recorder in his lap. What else did David say, he asked. He didn't want to discuss it over the phone, May replied, said it needed to be in person. Elias nodded. That made sense. If there were discrepancies in the estate, especially involving signed documents, it wasn't something you handled casually. The town came into view slowly, buildings appearing one by one through the trees, small, quiet, unchanged in the way places like that tended to be. Elias parked in front of the hardware store first. Give me a minute, he said. May raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. He stepped inside, the bell above the door ringing softly. The store smelled like wood, metal and dust, familiar. Behind the counter, an older man looked up. Elias? He said, surprised. Elias gave a brief nod. I need a cassette player, anything that still works. The man blinked, then let out a low whistle. That's going back a bit, you got one? The man thought for a second, then nodded toward the back. Might have something in storage. Give me a minute, Elias waited, his fingers tapping lightly against the counter. Not impatient, focused. A few minutes later, the man returned with a small, dusty player. Found it in a box of old stuff, he said. No promises, but it should still run. Elias took it without hesitation. I'll take it. Back outside, he didn't get back in the truck right away. Instead, he set the player on the hood, slid the cassette inside, and pressed down until it clicked into place. May stepped up beside him. You sure you want to do this out here, she asked. Elias didn't look at her. No. He pressed play. For a second, nothing happened. Then the tape whirred to life. Static filled the air first, a low, uneven hiss, then a click and then a voice. Not his, Marcus. Just need you to sign it, Denise. It's not a big deal. The court won't look too close if the statement's already notarized. Elias's grip tightened on the edge of the hood. Another voice followed. Denise. It says he was drunk. A pause. He wasn't. Marcus' voice again, sharper now. Doesn't matter. It's about what they believe, not what actually happened. Silence. Then Denise again, quieter. What if it comes back later? It won't, Marcus said. By the time anyone checks, it won't matter. He'll be out of the picture. Elias felt something inside him drop. Not anger, something colder. Final. The tape crackled again. Then one more line. Marcus's voice, lower now, and once the property's clear, we can deal with the rest. The recording cut to static. Elias didn't move. Didn't breathe. The town around him seemed to fade into nothing. May reached out slowly and turned the player off. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Elias straightened. His expression had changed completely. No confusion, no hesitation, just clarity. They weren't just keeping me away, he said quietly. May nodded. No, Elias picked up the recorder, his fingers steady now. They were waiting for me to disappear. He turned toward the truck. We're going to see David, May hesitated. Elias, he stopped and looked at her. You understand what this means, right? She said. If this is real, and it sounds real, then this isn't just family anymore. Elias held her gaze. I know exactly what it is. He opened the truck door. May studied him for another second, then nodded and got in. As the engine started, Elias glanced once more at the recorder in his hand, then at the reflection of himself in the windshield. For years, he had been the man waiting. Now, for the first time, he was the one coming back, and someone was going to have to answer for it. David Chen's office sat across from the post office, just as May had said, a narrow brick building with a single glass door and a faded sign that hadn't been updated in years. It looked like the kind of place where nothing dramatic ever happened. Elias parked the truck and turned off the engine, but he didn't get out right away. The recorder sat on the seat beside him. The affidavit was folded neatly in his jacket pocket. For years, he had walked into places like this asking for help, asking for a chance, asking for someone to listen. Today felt different. Today he wasn't asking, he stepped out. Inside, the office was quiet. A receptionist looked up briefly, then down at her computer. No one else in the waiting area. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here to see David Chen," Elias said. "It's about the Ashford estate." She hesitated just slightly, then nodded. One moment. A minute later, a door opened down the hall. David Chen stepped out. He was younger than Elias expected, late 30s, maybe early 40s, clean-cut, sharp eyes, the kind that didn't miss details. He took one look at Elias and something in his expression shifted. "You're Elias Ashford," he said. Elias nodded. "I was told you might come in," David added. "Come with me." They moved into a small office, papers stacked neatly across the desk. Not messy, but not untouched either. The kind of space where things were constantly being worked on. May stayed by the door. Elias didn't sit. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the affidavit, and placed it on the desk. "This was filed with the court," he said. "I want you to look at it." David picked it up carefully, scanning it once, then again more slowly. His brow furrowed as he leaned back slightly. "I've seen this before," he said. Elias's jaw tightened. "Then you know it's false." David didn't answer that directly. "What I know," he said, "is that this document is part of a broader case file that led to a denial of visitation rights. It carries weight because it was sworn and notarized." "It was a lie," Elias said. David looked up at him. "Do you have proof of that?" Elias reached down and set the cassette recorder on the desk. David's eyes shifted to it. "That's what we came here to find out," Elias said. David hesitated, then stood and moved to a cabinet along the wall. He pulled out a small, more modern playback device, something adapted for older media, and set it beside the recorder. "Let's hear it," he said. Elias didn't sit. He pressed play. The same static filled the room. The same voices followed. "Marcus, Denise." The words landed differently this time, in a smaller space, with someone trained to hear what mattered. David didn't interrupt, didn't react outwardly, but Elias could see the shift in his posture, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the way his fingers tapped once against the desk and then stopped. When the recording ended, the silence in the room felt sharper. David turned off the device and looked at Elias. "Where did you get this?" "In the cabin," Elias said. "Hidden behind a compartment I didn't even remember building." David nodded slowly. "That's significant. Is it enough?" Elias asked. David didn't answer right away. He picked up the affidavit again, laying it beside the recorder as if comparing two versions of the same reality. "It's not immediate proof in a legal sense," he said carefully, "but it's strong evidence. It's enough to raise serious questions about the integrity of the original filing." Elias exhaled, but it wasn't relief. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that trigger a review," David said, "especially if there are discrepancies elsewhere in the estate." May stepped forward slightly. "You mentioned missing records." David nodded. "There are inconsistencies in the financial trail," he said. "Payments that don't align with documented income, transfers that don't match reported sources. At the time, it wasn't enough to challenge anything directly, but now," he glanced at the recorder, "now it becomes part of a pattern." Elias leaned forward, his voice low. "Tell me what they were trying to do." David held his gaze. "They were positioning themselves," he said. "If you were legally deemed unstable, or if your claims were discredited, it would limit your ability to assert rights over any remaining property or financial interest tied to your name." Elias felt something settle into place. "So when I disappeared," he said, "it made things easier." David didn't sugarcoat it. "Yes." The word landed clean, no hesitation, no doubt. Elias straightened slowly. "For them," he said. "For them," David confirmed. May looked between them, and now? David sat back, folding his hands together. "Now we have grounds to reopen part of the record," he said. "But it won't be simple. We'll need to verify the recording, confirm its authenticity, and cross-reference it with the original filings. That takes time." Elias nodded once. "I'm not in a hurry." That wasn't entirely true. But he wasn't going to rush this. Not after everything that had already been taken. David studied him for a moment, then reached for another file on his desk. He opened it and flipped through a few pages before pulling one out. "There's something else," he said. Elias's attention sharpened. "What?" David slid the document across the desk. Elias picked it up. It wasn't an affidavit, it wasn't a letter, it was a property inquiry request, filed 3 months ago. His eyes moved across the page quickly. The request wasn't for the main house. It was for a secondary structure. Location, rural property, Cedar Falls outskirts. The cabin. Elias's grip tightened. Who filed this? David didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed to the name at the bottom of the page. Elias followed his finger and went still. Denise Millard, not Marcus, not a third party, her. Elias looked up slowly. She knew, he said. David nodded. At least recently, he said. She may not have known everything, but she knew enough to start asking questions. May frowned. Why now? David closed the file. Because something changed, he said. People don't start digging into old property records unless they think there's something to find. Elias's mind moved quickly. The letters, the compartments, the recording, the missing half of the photograph. Something had shifted, not just for him, for them too. They're not waiting anymore, he said. David didn't disagree. No, he said quietly, they're not. Elias looked down at the document again, then at the recorder on the desk. For years he had been the one searching. Now someone else was catching up. And that made everything more dangerous. He set the paper down carefully. We need to move faster, he said. David nodded once. I'll start the process, he said. But you should be prepared for something else. Elias met his gaze. What? David didn't soften it. If she filed this request, he said, then she knows the cabin exists. A beat. And if she knows that Elias's jaw tightened, she knows where to find me. The room fell quiet again, not uncertain this time. Certain. Elias picked up the recorder and slipped it back into his jacket. Then he turned toward the door. May followed without a word. Outside, the air felt colder than before, sharper, more awake. Elias stepped onto the sidewalk and looked down the street. Everything looked the same, but it wasn't. Not anymore. He moved toward the truck, his steps steady. May opened the passenger door, then paused. Elias, she said. He stopped. You ready for what comes next? Elias didn't answer right away. He looked out toward the road leading back to the cabin, then back toward the town, then finally at her. I've been ready for 15 years, he said. They got into the truck. The engine started. And as they pulled away from the curb, Elias reached into his jacket one more time. Not for the recorder, for the torn photograph. He looked at it again. At the empty space where someone had been cut out. Then his eyes shifted to something he hadn't noticed before. Faint, almost invisible. A partial reflection in the glass behind him. Another figure. Not fully in frame, but close enough to recognize the shape. Elias's grip tightened. Because whoever had been cut out of that photograph had been standing right beside Denise, and they were still part of this story. Clara didn't expect the call to come while she was still sitting in her car. She had parked outside a gas station just off Route 9, engine off, phone at 11%, staring at the steering wheel like it might give her a plan. The duffel bag sat in the back seat, everything she owned packed into something that looked too small to matter. She hadn't slept much the night before, or the night before that. The same thoughts kept circling, rent she couldn't afford, jobs that wouldn't call back. The way her mother had stood in the kitchen, folding a towel that didn't need folding, like the moment didn't belong to her. Like Clara didn't belong to her. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Unknown number. She almost let it go, then she answered. Clara Ashford? A man's voice said. She hesitated. Yeah. This is David Chen. I've been trying to reach you regarding your grandfather's estate. The words didn't land all at once. My what? Your grandfather, Elias Ashford. He passed away 3 months ago. Clara blinked. That's not possible, she said. He died before I was born. There was a pause on the other end. No, David said carefully. He didn't. He lived in Cedar Falls. I have documentation going back 15 years. He named you as the sole beneficiary of his property. Clara stared straight ahead. The gas station lot stretched out in front of her. A pickup idled near the pumps. Someone walked past with a bag of snacks. Normal life, moving like nothing had shifted. But something had. You have the wrong person, she said. I don't, David replied. He updated his will every year. He kept asking if we'd found you. Her grip tightened on the phone. What did he leave? A cabin, paid in full. No liens, no outstanding taxes. He made sure of that. Clara swallowed. My mom said he was dead. Another pause. I can't speak to what your mother told you, David said. But I can tell you he was alive, and he spent years trying to locate you. The words hit harder than she expected. Trying, not forgetting. Not disappearing, trying. Clara looked down at her hands. They were shaking slightly. "Where is it?" she asked. David gave her the address, his voice steady, precise directions, landmarks. A town she had never heard of. A place 5 hours north that might as well have been another world. "I'll be in my office tomorrow," he added. "Across from the post office. If you decide to come." Clara ended the call and sat there for a long time, 5 minutes, 10, maybe more. Her phone screen went dark in her hand. She didn't move. Her grandfather wasn't dead. He had been alive the entire time, and no one had told her. Her mind moved quickly, replaying years in fragments, conversations that never went anywhere, questions that got shut down before they were fully asked. The way her mother would change the subject when anything about her father's side of the family came up. She had assumed there was nothing there, that it had all ended before she ever had a chance to know it. Now that assumption felt placed, like something she had been given instead of something she had discovered. Clara let out a slow breath and reached for the glove compartment. She pulled it open and took out the only photograph she had kept. She didn't look at it often, didn't need to. She knew it by memory, a faded image. 2 adults standing close together. One of them her father, the other's the edge was worn where her thumb had pressed against it over the years. There was space in the frame that didn't quite make sense. A slight imbalance in the way the background aligned. Like something had once been there and then wasn't anymore. She had never thought much about it, until now. Clara turned the photo slightly, catching the reflection of light across its surface. Something flickered, a faint shape in the glass. Not clear, not complete, but enough to suggest someone had been standing just out of frame. Her chest tightened. "Who are you?" she murmured. The question wasn't really about the photo. It was about everything. She reached into the back seat and pulled her duffel bag forward, setting it on the passenger side. Then she opened her wallet and counted what she had left. $17, not enough for anything long-term, but enough for gas, barely. She looked at the phone again. 5 hours north, a cabin. A man who had apparently spent years trying to find her, and a mother who had said he was dead. Clara closed her eyes for a second. Then she made a decision. She turned the key. The engine rattled, hesitated, then caught. The check engine light blinked on immediately. "Yeah," she muttered. "I know." She pulled out of the lot and headed toward the highway. The road stretched ahead, long and open. The city thinned out into strip malls, then empty stretches of land, then trees. The farther she drove, the quieter it got. No calls, no messages, nothing pulling her back. For the first time in days, that didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like space. She stopped once to fill up what she could. $9. Enough to keep going. She didn't think about turning around, didn't think about calling her mother. Not yet. There were too many questions. And for once, she wasn't going to accept silence as an answer. By the time she crossed into Cedar Falls, the sun was already dropping. The town was small. Not the kind of small that felt charming, the kind that just existed. A single main street, a diner, a hardware store, a general store with faded paint and a bell over the door. Clara slowed as she drove through it, taking it in. This was where he had lived. This was where he had waited. The thought settled into her chest in a way she didn't know how to process. She parked near the general store and stepped out of the car. The air felt different here. Cleaner, colder, quieter. The bell above the store door rang as she pushed it open. Inside, an older woman looked up from behind the counter. Their eyes met. And something in the woman's expression changed instantly. Recognition, not confusion, not curiosity. Recognition. "You're his granddaughter," the woman said. Clara froze. "How do you know that?" The woman set down what she was holding and stepped around the counter slowly, her gaze steady. "Because you look exactly like your father," she said. Clara felt her throat tighten. "I didn't even know my grandfather was alive," she said, "until about an hour ago." The woman nodded, like that confirmed something she had already suspected. "My name's May," she said. "I was his neighbor." Clara shifted her weight slightly, still holding onto the edge of the door like she might need to leave. "He talked about you," May continued. "Every day. For years." The words hit harder than anything else so far. Every day. Clara looked down at the floor, blinking once then again. "He tried to find you," May added quietly. "Never stopped." Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "Then why didn't he?" she asked. May didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied Clara's face, like she was deciding how much to say. Then she spoke. Because someone made sure he couldn't. Clara's head lifted. What does that mean? May hesitated. Just enough to make the air shift. Then she said, there are things in that cabin you need to see. Clara felt something cold settle into her chest. Not fear. Not exactly. Something sharper. What kind of things? May held her gaze, the kind that change how you see your whole family. Clara didn't move, didn't speak. For a moment, everything inside her went still. Then she nodded once. Show me, she said. May didn't smile. She just reached for her keys. And as they stepped out into the fading light together, Clara glanced back at her car. At the life she had been pushed out of. At the silence she had been given as truth. Then she turned forward again, toward the road that led out of town, toward the cabin, toward the answers she wasn't ready for. And as they got into May's truck, Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out the photograph one more time. She looked at the empty space beside her father, then at the faint reflection she had almost missed, and for the first time she understood something clearly. Whoever had been cut out of that photo had been erased on purpose, and she was about to find out why. The cabin sat farther out than Clara expected. May's truck turned off the main road onto a narrow gravel path that cut through dense trees. The tires crunched slowly, the sound echoing in the quiet like something breaking. The deeper they went, the less the outside world felt real. No streetlights, no houses. Just trees and shadows stretching long under the fading sky. Clara held the photograph in her lap, her thumb pressing against that empty space again. Erased. That word wouldn't leave her alone. Did he live out here alone the whole time, she asked. May nodded, eyes on the road. Last 10 years, yeah. Before that, he still had the house in town. But after, things changed. After what? May didn't answer right away. Instead, she slowed the truck as the cabin came into view. It wasn't large, not impressive. Just a wooden structure, weathered but intact, sitting in a small clearing like it had been placed there carefully, intentionally. The porch sagged slightly on one side. The windows were dark, but it didn't feel abandoned, it felt kept. Clara stepped out of the truck before May had even turned off the engine. The air hit her first. Cooler here, still. Like the trees were holding something in. This is it, May said quietly behind her. Clara didn't respond. She walked toward the front steps slowly, her boots pressing into the dirt, each step heavier than the last. The closer she got, the more something inside her tightened. Not fear, recognition. But she had never been here before. At least, that's what she had always believed. Her hand hovered near the door. It wasn't locked. That alone made her pause. He never locked it, she asked. May shook her head, said there was nothing in here worth stealing. Clara swallowed, then she pushed the door open. The hinges creaked softly. The smell came next. Old wood, dust, something faintly familiar she couldn't place. The inside was dim but not neglected. A table stood in the center of the room. A chair pulled out slightly, like someone had just stood up from it. A small stove in the corner, shelves along the walls, everything simple, everything intentional. Clara stepped inside. Her eyes moved slowly, taking in every detail. There were no pictures on the walls, no decorations, nothing personal at first glance. But the longer she stood there, the more she noticed what was there. The table wasn't empty. There was a stack of envelopes, tied together with twine. Clara moved toward them without thinking. Her breath slowed, her fingers trembled slightly as she reached down and picked them up. The paper felt old, worn at the edges, but intact. She untied the twine carefully and pulled the top envelope free. Her name was written on it, Clara Ashford. In careful, steady handwriting, her chest tightened so fast it hurt. She flipped the envelope over, stamped, addressed, and marked in red ink across the front. Repine to sender, her stomach dropped. She grabbed another one, same thing, another, same. Every single envelope in the stack had been sent, and every single one had been returned. Clara felt something inside her chest crack open. He wrote to me, she whispered. May stepped closer but didn't interrupt. Clara's hands moved faster now, pulling envelope after envelope, scanning them, seeing the same mark over and over again. Return to sender, return to sender, return to sender. He tried, she said, louder now. He tried to reach me. Her voice broke on the last word. All those years, all those empty birthdays, all those times she had been told no one was looking for her. No one cared. It wasn't true. It had never been true. Clara pressed the stack against her chest like it might hold her together. Then something else caught her eye, a small indentation in the wall behind the table. Subtle, almost invisible, but wrong. She stepped closer, ran her fingers along the wood. There, a seam. May, she said quietly. Did you know about this? May's voice came from behind her. He built parts of this place himself, said he liked to keep things tucked away. Clara pressed against the panel. It didn't move at first. She pushed harder. A soft click. Then the wood shifted slightly inward. Her breath caught. She pulled it open. Inside was a narrow compartment, and inside that more letters, stacks of them, organized carefully, along with something else. A small metal box. Clara reached for it slowly, like it might disappear if she moved too fast. The box was heavier than she expected, cold. She set it on the table and opened it. Inside was a photograph, different from the one she had. This one wasn't cut. It showed 3 people standing together, her father, her grandfather, and Clara froze. Her breath stopped halfway in her chest. Because the third person wasn't a stranger, it was her, older, standing between them, smiling. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the photo. This doesn't make sense, she whispered. She had no memory of this, no memory of ever meeting him, no memory of standing there. But the image was clear, real, undeniable. Photos can be dated, May said softly. Check the back. Clara flipped it over. There was writing, a date, 5 years ago, 5 years. Her heart started pounding harder. I wasn't here, she said. I wasn't, I would remember this. May didn't respond immediately. Clara looked up. What aren't you telling me? May held her gaze, something heavy in her eyes now. He said someone was interfering, she said slowly. Mail going missing, calls not going through, even visits not reaching you. Clara's mind raced. No, she said, that's not possible. But even as she said it, something else surfaced, a memory. Her mother standing by the door one evening, telling her someone had come by. Someone she didn't need to see. Clara had believed her. Of course she had. Who would do that, she asked. May didn't answer right away. Instead, she gestured toward the rest of the compartment. There's more, she said. He didn't just write letters. Clara looked back down. Beneath the photograph and letters was something wrapped in cloth. Her hands moved slowly as she unwrapped it. A small cassette recorder, old, scratched, but intact, and beside it a tape, labeled in the same careful handwriting she had seen on the envelopes for Clara. If anything happens. Clara's throat went dry, her fingers hovered over the recorder. If anything happens, she repeated under her breath. May stepped back slightly, giving her space. You should hear it, she said. Clara nodded, but she didn't move right away, because something inside her was resisting. Because once she pressed play, there would be no going back. She would know, and knowing meant choosing. Choosing what to do with the truth, choosing who had lied, choosing whether to confront it. Clara closed her eyes for a second. Then she picked up the recorder. Her thumb rested on the play button. Her heart pounded so loud it filled the room, and just before she pressed it, she noticed something else, a second tape, partially hidden beneath the first. No label, no writing, just a strip of masking tapes across it. Clara frowned. May, did you see this one before? May leaned in slightly. No, she said quietly. Clara picked it up, turned it in her hand, and for some reason, that blank tape felt heavier than everything else in the room, because it wasn't meant for her, not directly. It felt like something that had been hidden even deeper, something he hadn't labeled on purpose. Clara looked back at the recorder, then at the 2 tapes in her hands. One meant for her, one that wasn't. Her chest tightened again, because suddenly, the question wasn't just what her grandfather had tried to tell her. It was what he had been afraid to say out loud. Clara slowly slid the labeled tape into the recorder. Her thumb hovered again. Then she pressed play. The tape hissed softly before anything else came through. Clara froze, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table as the sound filled the small cabin. It wasn't clean. It wasn't polished. It sounded like something recorded late at night, in a room too quiet, with someone who didn't expect to be heard by anyone else. Then his voice came. Low, rough, familiar in a way that made her chest ache before she even understood why. If you're hearing this, then I ran out of time. Clara stopped breathing. Elias. There was no doubt she had never heard him before. Not like this, not alive in her ears. But she knew. I don't know what they told you, his voice continued, slow and careful. I don't know what version of me you grew up with. But I need you to hear this from me at least once. Clara's throat tightened. She glanced at May, who stood still behind her, eyes lowered, giving her space. I wrote to you, Elias said, every year, every birthday, sometimes more. I didn't miss a single one. Clara's eyes dropped to the stack of returned envelopes on the table. I know they didn't reach you. I started to understand that after a while, but I kept writing anyway, because stopping felt like giving up on you. Her vision blurred. I tried to call, I tried to come see you, but every time there was something in the way. A number that didn't work, a message passed along that you didn't want contact, a door that never opened. Clara shook her head slowly, almost unconsciously. That wasn't true, she whispered. But the tape kept playing. I didn't believe it at first, Elias continued. Not about you, never about you. I knew who you were, I knew what your father raised you to be. Her chest tightened again at the mention of her father. I went to court, Elias said. I asked for visitation. I asked for the chance to see you, to explain, to be part of your life in some way. But by then, things had already been decided. There was a pause on the tape. A long one. When his voice came back, it sounded heavier. Your mother told them I was unstable, that I had a history I couldn't fix, that I would only bring harm into your life. Clara's fingers dug into the wood. No, she said under her breath. She had papers, statements, things I couldn't fully prove wrong at the time. And the court, they believed what they could see on paper. Clara's breathing turned uneven. They issued restrictions, Elias continued. Limited contact. Then no contact at all after I tried to show up in person. Her stomach dropped. That day his voice faltered slightly. I thought if I just saw you, even from a distance, you'd recognize me. That something in you would know. Clara's grip loosened for a second, and then I realized you weren't even told I was there. Silence filled the tape for a moment. Not empty silence, heavy silence. I don't blame you, Elias said quietly. Not once, not ever. Whatever you were told, you had every reason to believe it. Clara's eyes burned. Because the truth is, I wasn't always the man I should been, he went on. I drank too much. I made mistakes after your father passed. I gave your mother reasons to doubt me. Real ones. Clara blinked. This wasn't a defense. It was a confession. I tried to fix it, Elias said. I stopped. I got help. I built this place piece by piece. I wanted something steady. Something I could show you one day and say, I didn't stay that man. Clara looked around the cabin. The walls, the careful structure, the quiet order of everything. Healing takes time, Elias said softly, but sometimes people decide who you are before you get the chance to change. Clara swallowed hard. And your mother, she was hurting, he added. Losing your father, it broke something in her. I think she thought keeping me away would protect you. Clara closed her eyes briefly. Protect? Or control? I don't know when it stopped being about protection, Elias continued, but I know it did, because the letters came back, every single one. Clara opened her eyes again, staring at the red stamps on the envelopes. I kept them, he said. Not because I needed proof, but because I needed to remember that I tried. Her breath hitched. If you ever find this, his voice softened, I don't want you to carry my regrets. I want you to carry the truth. You were never abandoned. Not by me. Clara's hand shook. You were loved every day, even when I couldn't reach you. The tape clicked softly, but it didn't stop. There was another shift, a slight rustle, like he had adjusted the recorder. And there's something else, Elias said, quieter now. Something I didn't want to leave in writing. Clara's heart started pounding again. If things went the way I feared, then someone might try to control what's left behind. Not just the cabin, not just the money. Clara's eyes flicked to May. What's left behind? She whispered. There are records, Elias continued. Legal ones. Things I filed years ago that were never followed through the way they should have been. Clara leaned closer to the recorder. I couldn't prove everything alone, he said, but I left copies, documents that show the timeline, the attempts I made, the responses I received. Her pulse quickened. They're not here in the open, Elias added, because I didn't trust that this place would stay untouched forever. Clara's grip tightened. Look behind the north wall panel, he said. Second beam from the window. There's a compartment I sealed later. That's where the real proof is. Clara's head snapped toward the far wall. North wall. Second beam. There's something in there that shouldn't exist if everything was handled honestly, Elias said. Her breath caught. And if you find it, you'll know exactly who made sure I stayed out of your life. The tape clicked again, and stopped. The silence that followed felt louder than the recording itself. Clara didn't move. For a long moment, she just stood there, the recorder still in her hand, her heart racing with something that felt like both grief and clarity at the same time. He hadn't abandoned her, he had fought, and someone had made sure she never knew. Clara slowly turned toward the north wall. Her eyes traced the beams, counting 1, 2. Her breath grew shallow. That one, she said quietly. May stepped closer but didn't touch anything. Do you want me to know? Clara cut in. Her voice was steady now. Different. I need to do this. She walked to the wall, her hand lifting, fingers brushing against the wood. It felt solid, no obvious seam, no visible opening. But now she knew what to look for. Her fingers pressed along the edge of the beam, searching, feeling, waiting. Then a faint shift. Clara's breath stopped. She pushed harder. The wood gave slightly, a hidden latch, her pulse surged. This is it, she whispered. The panel loosened, slowly, carefully. Clara pulled it open, and inside there wasn't just paper. There was a thick folder, and on top of it a document with a legal stamp, partially visible, but enough to read the words at the top. Restraining order petition. Filed by. Clara's hand trembled. Because the name wasn't Elias, it wasn't a court clerk, it wasn't even a third party. It was her mother's handwriting, signed, submitted, and dated, before the first letter had ever been returned. The courtroom wasn't large, but it felt heavy with everything that had been carried into it. Clara sat at the long table beside David Chen, her hands folded tightly in front of her. The folder from the cabin rested between them, worn at the edges now from being opened too many times. Across the room, Denise sat alone. Marcus wasn't there. He had left 2 days earlier after the recording surfaced during the initial review. No explanation, no defense, just gone. Denise didn't look at Clara. Not once. The judge flipped through the documents slowly. Letters, returned envelopes, the restraining order petition, the affidavit Marcus had signed, the recording transcript. Every piece had been verified, not rushed, not assumed. Verified. The timeline is clear, the judge said finally. Mr. Ashford made repeated attempts to contact his granddaughter over a sustained period of time. Those attempts were obstructed. Clara felt her chest tighten, but she stayed still. Additionally, the judge continued, there is evidence that the restraining order petition contained statements that were, at minimum, misleading, and at worst, intentionally false. Denise's shoulders shifted slightly, but she still didn't speak. The court recognizes that grief can influence decisions, the judge said. However, grief does not justify the prolonged denial of lawful contact, nor the redirection of funds intended for another party. Clara's fingers pressed into each other. Funds. That part had taken longer to prove. Bank records, transfers, patterns that didn't match what Elias had intended. David had walked her through it carefully, step by step, making sure every claim was backed by something real. No shortcuts. No assumptions. The estate review confirms that funds set aside for Ms. Ashford were accessed and utilized without proper authorization, the judge said. Those funds are to be returned through the estate distribution process. Denise finally lifted her head, not toward Clara, toward the judge. Her voice when it came was quiet. I didn't spend it the way it sounds. David remained still. Clara didn't react. The judge didn't interrupt her. I kept things going, Denise continued, her voice tightening. After my husband died, everything fell apart. I didn't trust anyone. Not him. Not his father. I thought, she stopped, swallowing hard. I thought I was protecting what was left. Clara closed her eyes for a second. Protecting. That word again. You redirected communication, the judge said evenly. You filed legal documents that restricted access. You maintained those restrictions for years beyond what was necessary. Denise's hands trembled slightly in her lap. I didn't know how to fix it after, she said. It got too big. The room fell quiet. Too big. Clara understood that. But understanding didn't undo what had been done. The court will proceed with the estate redistribution, the judge said. Ms. Ashford will assume full legal ownership of the cabin property and associated assets. Restrictions on access are nullified. Financial restitution will be processed under supervision. A pause. And any further disputes regarding the estate must be handled through proper legal channels. It was over, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Clara didn't feel relief the way she expected. It wasn't a release, it was something steadier, something quieter. The truth had been placed where it belonged, out in the open. When they stepped outside, the air felt different, cleaner. David handed her the final documents. "This isn't instant," he said. "The funds will take time to reconcile. But legally it's yours now." Clara nodded. "Thank you," she said. He gave a small nod in return, then stepped away to take a call. May stood nearby, leaning against the railing, watching Clara with a soft expression. "You okay?" she asked. Clara exhaled slowly. "I think so," she said. "I just thought it would feel different." May smiled gently. "It usually does." Clara looked back toward the courthouse doors. Denise hadn't come out yet. For a moment, Clara considered leaving, just walking away. But something held her there, not obligation, not forgiveness, something else. Denise stepped outside a minute later. She looked smaller somehow. Not physically, just less certain. Their eyes met for the first time that day. Neither of them moved right away. Then Denise took a few slow steps forward. "I didn't think he had changed," she said quietly, "back then." Clara didn't respond. "I saw what losing your father did to him," Denise continued. "And I thought if I let him close again, he'd hurt you the same way." Clara's voice was calm when she spoke. "You didn't give him the chance to be anything else." Denise's face tightened. "I didn't know how," she said. Clara nodded once. That too, she understood. "But it didn't change the outcome. You kept going," Clara said. "Even after you knew he was trying." Denise didn't deny it. "I couldn't admit I was wrong," she said. "Not after everything I had already said." Silence stretched between them. Clara felt the weight of it, years of it. "You don't get to decide what I do with this," Clara said finally. "With the house, with his name, with what he left me." Denise nodded slowly. "I know." Another pause. "I'm not cutting you out completely," Clara added, "but I'm not going back to what it was either." Denise's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "That's fair," she said. "It wasn't forgiveness. But it wasn't rejection either. It was a boundary, and for the first time, it felt like Clara's to set. Weeks later, the cabin didn't feel like a place someone had left behind. It felt alive. Clara sat on the porch as the sun dipped low behind the trees, the wood warm beneath her hands. The repairs had been small. A loose, fixed. A window reinforced, nothing that changed what it was. Just enough to keep it standing. May came by often, not to check on her, just to sit, to talk, to share quiet moments that didn't need explanation. The town started to feel different too. Less like a place she had been sent to, more like somewhere she had chosen. Inside, the letters were organized now, not hidden, not sealed away, each one opened, read, kept. Clara didn't rush through them, she took her time. Because each one carried something she had never been given before. Proof, not just of what had been taken from her, but of what had always been there. One evening, a man stopped by the cabin, older, quiet. He stood awkwardly at the edge of the porch, holding his hat in his hands. "I heard this place was his," he said. Clara nodded. "It is," she replied. He hesitated. "He used to help me out when things got rough. Didn't ask for anything back." Clara studied him for a moment. Then she stepped aside. "You can come sit," she said. He looked surprised, then grateful. That night the porch held 2 chairs instead of 1, and a story that didn't end with loss. Clara leaned back slightly, listening to the quiet sounds of the trees, the soft creak of the wood beneath her, the steady rhythm of something that had outlasted everything else. The cabin breathed, not because it was alive, but because what had been built there hadn't disappeared. It had waited, just like he had. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, letting that settle. Then she looked out at the fading light and said softly, almost to herself, "Maybe love didn't always show up the way people expected. Sometimes it waited in silence. Sometimes it had to be uncovered. And sometimes it came back long after it should have been gone." If you've ever had to question what love really looked like, or where it disappeared to, share your thoughts below, and stay with us for more stories that remind us what truth can still restore.